Welcome to the Afterspin, opinions from thought leaders in our state. I want to ask John Hood and Chris Fitzsimon, when Republicans took control of the General Assembly in 2011, they were critical of the pork barrel spending that was often hidden in the state budget by Democrats. Well, the Civitas Institute recently read all the fine print in the budget and determined there was somewhere between 30 and as much as $100 million of pork in the budget that the lawmakers just passed. They claim that some of the funding was doled out to lawmakers who had competitive election campaigns this November, and some of these folks never even asked for the funding. Chris Fitzsimon, your comment on pork barrel.
Well, here's a statement I will probably never say again on NC Spin. The Civitas Institute is correct. And I thought this was a bad practice when the Democrats did it, and they did it in different ways, and I think it's a bad practice now. And then you add on the layer of hypocrisy that you mentioned. We had Republicans railing against this for years and years in the early 2000s up until the 2010 election. And I will say, if the first couple sessions they funded things I didn't want to be funded, I wouldn't necessarily think I wanted to pay for, but I didn't think the process was as out of control as it is now. And clearly, people in leadership positions, as you mentioned, people in competitive districts, maybe the most telling one was in Charlotte, where they're trying to help a Charlotte legislator and wanted to give a group money to disperse, and the group didn't want to do it. This is clearly a process where that's out of control, and it points to what I was saying earlier on the show and other times, that the legislative process itself is a real problem now, and this is a very expensive example of that.
John, is this a case where power corrupts and absolute power corrupts absolutely?
Yeah, it is like that. I mean, you get sometimes these sort of backhanded defenses of a pork barrel system along the lines of this is just how the legislative sausage is made, which is a bad pun, but also I think unnecessarily cynical. You don't have to have a system like this to grease the skids. I keep making these analogies because otherwise you can't pass bills. You need the ability to hand pork barrel out to get an extra vote. I just think that's yesterday's or last millennia's way to approach legislation. If we want to fund a program, we should put money into an executive agency with specific standards and let them follow a procedure and not have the legislature earmark particular funds for particular nonprofits or particular communities. It's abusive. And I appreciate Chris saying is what he did, and he didn't ham it up too much.
Well, but so far as it goes, anybody that's been watching this show over the past 19 years, we're getting ready to start our 20th year, by the way. Anybody that's been watching this show over the past 19 years knows we've been critical of this pork barrel the whole time, but it appears that it is rearing its ugly head again. Why?
Well, because I think maybe you got to a little bit of power corrupts absolutely. And also, when you're in control for a long time, and now the Republicans have been in control since 2011, they've had the same leaders in the Senate since 2011 largely, a lot of the same people in the House, although not the Speaker. I think you do sort of get used to doing things your own way, and you don't respect the process. You don't have a big open debate about where we should spend our money, and you reward people who support you. John's right about another thing, which is they have supermajorities. They don't need this to pass bills. This is clearly to help them maintain that supermajority. It's also to reward people. It's just a bad practice.
I'm going to save this tape. I think the two of y'all have agreed with each other more on this particular segment than any time in the whole night. But so far as it goes, Senate President Pro Tem Phil Berger says that a lot of this money, John, was given to municipalities to try to help strengthen their communities, and that it wasn't just pork barrel money. A lot of these communities didn't even ask for the money.
Well, there's almost never a case where a pork barrel project, you can go back 10, 20, 50 years, there's some reasonable rationale, well, if you spent this money, there will be somebody that benefits. Very rarely is pork barrel actually just stuffing somebody's backpack full of cash and say, run off with our money. There's always some kind of a titular explanation. If we wanted to help downtowns revitalize or whatever, and of course I'd be skeptical about using state money for that at all, but if we were going to do it, you'd set up a program, you'd fund it through the legislature, and then communities would apply, and you'd have a reasonable process that was not guided by legislative power. That's what we mean when we say pork barrel. It isn't necessarily that everything that's done is a bad product. It's not done the right way.
We can remember back in the time when every legislator got $50,000 or $100,000 just to dole out however they wanted.
And it's worth noting that was one of the things that led to the Democrats in the 90s losing control of the state house for 2 terms, is the abusive process by which that was doled out.
Well, thanks for watching the Afterspin. We'll have more video all during the week on ncspin.com.